Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. On this episode of Italics, we travel to Upstate New York and visit Laura Tomaselli and Phil Pinto, respectively director and producer of their recently released documentary, Lakota Nation versus the United States. Lakota Nation versus United States, directed by Jesse Shortbull and Laura Tomaselli, chronicles the Lakota Indians' century-long quest to reclaim the Black Hills, sacred land that was stolen in violation of treaty agreements. A searing, timely portrait of resistance, the film explores the way America has ignored its debt to indigenous communities and ponders what might be done today to repair the wrongs of the past.
My name is Laura Tomaselli. I'm the co-director and editor of Lakota Nation versus United States.
And I'm Phil Pinto. I'm one of the producers of Lakota Nation versus United States.
Lakota Nation versus United States chronicles the Lakota people's over 400-year struggle to reclaim the land that was stolen from them with the advance of the United States.
X marks the strange ways of time. How a century ago can feel like yesterday. And, quote, from this day forward, feels like never. X marks an agreement. Whatever name one uses to refer to the Black Hills, it is unquestionably the place of our beginning. And another X marks this land as ours, unquestionably by treaty.
Lakota Nation versus United States is the first film I've directed or co-directed with Jesse Shortbull. The previous film I'd worked on, which was called MLK FBI, one of the producers on that film, Benjamin Hedin, played matchmaker between Jesse and myself. Saw Jesse's filmmaking talents. Jesse went to Sundance, was a Sundance Fellow. Knew that I was a glutton for punishment and loved editing for 9 months straight in a room. And he really played matchmaker. He had read an article about the court case that's in the film, which is over 50 years in terms of one of the longest running court cases in United States history. And that really set off his interest in the subject. Jesse and I sort of had our first director date where we met each other and we sort of sussed each other out. We were chain smoking cigarettes in the parking lot of some South Dakota motel or something like that. You know what I mean? Just being like, what do you want the movie to be? What do you want the movie to be? I have a history, or I'm most interested in stories of resistance, stories of struggle. Generally, I've done a couple in America, but certainly worldwide. I think resistance movements are so interesting to me because they both tell us what the tipping point is for certain societies, to make people really get out there and demonstrate, which is something I'm very interested in now in America. Beyond that, I think, and this is something that Jesse and I, jumping the gun a bit, but we talked about a lot in making this film, is resistance movements are always this place of radical hope and radical optimism, because in order for them to exist, they have to be. So I think that I'm always drawn to stories like that. There were two things initially that really stuck out to us. One is that we wanted to get around the walls that people have up about thinking they understand this issue, thinking that they maybe understand Indians and American culture, but present it sensitively, but also in a way that's a little different than people would think. To that end, we knew we didn't want to make a straight talking heads documentary that was long and sort of labored, and we wanted to make it as dynamic as the story deserved to be. And then two, I think the most important thing for us was to make sure that the land itself that we're talking about, the land in question, was very much a character in the film. The land is a backdrop to a lot of Hollywood, a lot of American history, a lot of Native American history, and as much as we couldn't interview the land, that's a joke Jesse tries to make, that they wouldn't take our calls, we wanted to do whatever we could cinematically to make sure that the land came alive.
I got involved fairly early on in the film. I'd worked with Ben and Laura on MLK FBI, and so this felt like a natural kind of continuation of that same team, plus Jesse. Two things struck me really hard in terms of like getting me like lit up for the story, which was one, it's, you know, the West, the American West, and cowboys and natives, and that whole storyline is something that's been baked into like everyone that has grown up in the United States, has been baked into the story of the United States, the legend of the United States. And it's always been very one-sided, but I never thought about it that way. Just kind of like thinking about the other side of the coin, of which in any situation there is another side of a coin.
Much of what we've learned about the battle for the plains comes from what we've seen in Hollywood movies. When we saw the Indian defending his land, we cheered for the white man's soldiers.
The best way to kill people is to dehumanize them, right? To make them into caricatures. Whether it's Peter Pan, whether it's John Ford's The Searchers, which is considered not just the archetype of Western movies, but one of the great American films. And this is a classic Hollywood trope that makes invasion look like self-defense.
I think it's important to bring Indigenous voices and stories to the forefront in American culture because they've been so consistently misrepresented and misunderstood for so long. If I can expand that to a lot of different activists that are trying to protect the environment, to fight against degradation, further extraction, I find myself frustrated at the way that a lot of these activist movements are portrayed in the media, whether or not they're just misunderstood. It's like, what's the goal? We don't understand. And so part of making this film was really about taking these other film tropes that in the past in Hollywood have maybe harmed Native Americans through stereotypes, like a Western, overlaying the genre of a Western onto this fight, but changing the sides in terms of who we're fighting for. So that was really important to me. I think that it was also very important to me to overlay this idea of a superhero movie onto this, to say that these are people, they're putting their lives on the line. They could just be home like couch surfing, but they feel this calling to stand out here to protect the water, the land for all of us, not just for themselves. And so I think, you know, when Crystal Tubal's like, when she scales the water tower at the end, that to me is like, you know, Spider-Man's swinging in and saving the day.
Film is a really powerful medium to tell any story. Not only tell stories, but have an understanding of the world or the world around you or a different continent or a different place or a different time. But Indigenous storytelling and telling Indigenous stories, it's the most American story you can tell. It is the original American story. It just is. When Indigenous people are represented by non-Indigenous people in a film, historically, they've been the bad guy or the lazy person or the dumb person or like the savage. And that's not the case. They're human beings, just like you and I. And I think sometimes film can help convey that. So the same way that we were talking about, you drive by a protest and you're like, what are they even talking about? And you keep going and you forget about it. But if you understand why these people are out in the streets marching, then maybe you'll consider it. And maybe you'll be like, oh, you know, they're somebody's uncle or they're somebody's son or daughter. Certainly, we're all human beings. And I think filmmaking and storytelling can really help connect those dots sometimes.
This story specifically, came at a time when I was also reconsidering my relationship to nature post-pandemic. There's something that people might describe as woo-woo, but I believe that when certain opportunities are put into your path and they feel right, when Jesse and I met, it felt kind of fated. Like, you know, we could possibly try and do this gargantuan task of trying to do right by this massive, historically epic story.
I come from a background of like shooting television commercials and music videos, and I thought that beyond being able to work on the project and being drawn to the story itself, I thought that, you know, the one thing I could do is help bring the production value of the whole thing up and bring in crews that I had previously worked on, like our cinematographer, Kevin Phillips, who's a director in his own right. It was a very small group of people, very tight-knit group of people. We're just 2 vans cruising around South Dakota, filming as much nature as we could, and as well as interviewing like a lot of amazing people. I'm always drawn to projects, particularly in documentaries, that do show the other side of the coin, or do sort of explain how we got to where we are today without making anybody sort of like feel bad or be very preachy, which is something we try to do.
That's where we were like, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to connect this moment of racial uprising and reckoning of the very heart of this country to the struggle of indigenous people's land, and to the struggle right here in the Black Hills that is one of the longest places of resistance in this nation.
About 25 or 30 Indians demanding that the Black Hills of South Dakota be returned to the Sioux tribe have climbed Mount Rushmore and camped a few hundred yards from the gigantic carved likenesses of George Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson.
They say they have a right to the land. Do you think maybe that's why you're letting them stay there?
From the very beginning, after we had our sort of core team of 4, which was Phil, myself, Jesse Shortbull, and our other producer, Benjamin Hedin, 2 artistic footholds jumped out that you've already talked about. One was the poetry of Layli Long Soldier. And in the film, we're using one poem that she had already written that's from a brilliant book of poetry called Whereas. And the other poem, which is 135 X's, which is the X repeating poem in the film, that one she wrote for us. So even in the pitch, when we were trying to raise money for this, you know that you need to use news and anchor people to get through exposition quickly. That's something that will just happen, you know what I mean? It's a way to make it, to show that it's a big deal story, is that, you know, someone was talking about it on NBC News, right? So it was very important to me to have a Lakota person, but also a woman, telling their side of the story from the very beginning. The other thing that was a creative foothold in that pitch process that made it through, which is what you're talking about, was the music. Raven Chacon is our brilliant composer. We were lucky enough to start working with him. This is the first feature he scored right before he won the Pulitzer Prize in Music this year. He's the first Native composer to ever win that. There's so many things to love about his music because it can take so many different shapes. I think he certainly understands the world of chamber music and how to score for that, but also how to kind of make it fall apart, how to make it devolve. And he's also a great noise musician. So some of these guttural things, like these loud, low drones, or these high pitches, or all these other different soundscapes, he was able to do all of that for us.
I want to tell you about the Sioux uprising, but I don't know where to begin.
At the center of all the treaties the Lakota have signed with the United States government is the Black Hills.
A lot of times, I'm sorry if I'm going to steal your line, but
Hit me.
a lot of times documentaries can be very extractive. Filmmaker can go to a community that is not their own, drop in, get all the footage, shoot some interviews. SIA, the Native American community, has been exploited any number of ways for a very long time. And so we weren't always met. Like, I mean, sometimes there was skepticism about being involved in the project, or what is this project about, or what's it going to do, or is this help the community in any way, shape, or form, or are you just here to take a picture. So
Yeah. We tried to approach it holistically, where we're like, this interview should not be uncomfortable for you. This should not be traumatic for you. Tell us what you want to tell us. Tell us what you want us to know, you know? And I think that, I don't know that we're the ones that can say that we succeeded at that, but we certainly
Sure.
tried, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pandemic forced our hand in a couple different ways, where some people wanted to be interviewed, but because of the COVID restrictions on the reservation or their comfort level weren't available for us to do that. Others came through personal connections that Jesse was very friendly with these people. And so it was a combination of sort of experts or scholars and also people that are familiar. So we kind of tried to ride that line.
I will say all of the people in the film are people that Jesse, with the exception of one person, are people that Jesse knows, which is wild. Even Laley, it was his creative writing teacher when he went to IAIA in Santa Fe. So that was one of the reasons why, yes, we wanted Laley Long Soldier in the movie desperately, but she wasn't necessarily convinced immediately that it was right for her. And luckily Jesse had a relationship with her and they had a long conversation about it and she agreed to be in it. And I think one of the things that stuck out with me is one of the early conversations we had at the Red Cloud School, which is in the movie. You know, one of the counselors there said to me that this consistent portrayal of Lakota people, Pine Ridge specifically, which is such an impoverished community, as poor, just creates this this prophecy that will never stop. If all they see, the only portrayal they see of themselves is poor and out of luck, they can't imagine a future that's different for themselves, for younger people at least. And so I think that that's something that Jesse carried with him every day. That's something I definitely learned in terms of what we wanted to show, how to deal with people respectfully, what to shoot, what not to shoot. But it was certainly a learning process for me, yeah. Initially, our first trip, we brought a whole bunch of red cameras out into the middle of Montana. We filmed the Victory Ride, which is in the film, which is when everybody is running down the hill on their horses towards you at the end of the film. That was one of our first days of shooting. Our second day of shooting was the reenactment. And after that, it really settled down a bit into interviews and nature stuff.
Yeah. We did, I think, 3 separate trips.
3 separate trips.
To South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska.
We had 4 angles, obviously 4 cameras for the interviews. Everyone was there. When we were shooting nature stuff, we would break up into 2 teams and just get as much as we could. So we wouldn't all be in the same car to try and cover as much ground as we could.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of tough moments in making this film. But where we landed is they always serve to guide us onto the right path. In terms of the interviewees that were in the film, we felt like it was not, it did not fully explore or illustrate some of the concepts we needed to illustrate. And so we went back in, I want to say, maybe a month and a half before our Tribeca premiere, got 3 additional interviews that are in the film, and we edited like crazy for that last month, you know? And that was something that in the moment, you know, I'm like, but it absolutely was worth it, for sure. So, yeah.
There are certain avenues that, you know, if an interview falls through, that opens up the possibility of like another interview.
Yeah.
And like, it just felt very natural. And we were, because of the way that Laura and Jesse were making the movie, we all were able to react and adapt and change. So whether it was a process of elimination or a door closing opens up another door, or it was just having to be like, this is what we have and what be resourceful with what we can do in whatever situation. It helped set up parameters for the project and everybody was on board with that, thankfully. That's not always the case. It was a very lucky position for us to be in, that we had the trust of all of our collaborators, and you know, we were doing our best to live up to that.
So the editing process on Lakota Nation versus United States was, it's funny because it happened in bursts, I think. We really tried to rush and get a rough cut together very, very quickly, and it wasn't right. But I think everyone wanted to see where it was at, and it's always painful. There's no rough cut. I think that you're going to find any director, any editor is going to love their rough cut. So that's what happened first. I think as a documentary editor, I'm working on like the metaphor for this, but I think a lot of times you get a bunch of beautiful ingredients, but like no recipe, if that makes sense. So you spend months, working these smaller pieces that you like, moving them around and trying to find a story that feels like it connects in all the right places. For this, there are parts of it that are very, very chronological, but then there are parts that are out of sync that feel right thematically, where they fell. I think that we definitely had a much longer edit. We had an over 3-hour edit that I loved, but everyone was like, this is too long. So I had to, we had to make some tough decisions. There are a lot of really moving things on the editing room floor, It was a tough process, but we made it there, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, and to Laura and Jesse's credit, a lot of the writing happens in the edit, where we're reacting to where an interview goes or an extra story from an interview, and then we have the opportunity to go back and get not only more interviews and more footage, but also react to the stories we heard either that day or on the previous trip, and just try to find the right metaphor. And that and sort of combing through all of the additional like archival libraries of material.
2 of our executive producers, Marissa Tomei and Mark Ruffalo, have already done a lot of work in tandem with activists, both up at Standing Rock, and Mark Ruffalo specifically works a lot with the Lakota people. But both of them were sweet, supportive, and like the best EPs you could ask for, I think.
Yeah, we were incredibly lucky,
to
have them involved. And like Laura said, they just threw their weight behind the project almost immediately.
Yeah. In terms of the split between Jesse and myself in co-directing this film, while we were making this, he was working for the tribal government in Pine Ridge Reservation. So he was dealing with the problems of the reservation every single day for more than 12 hours a day. Every week, 7 days a week. So I could work in a vacuum. He could very much live what's happening there, and then we could meet and share cuts, and he could say, this seems right, this seems inaccurate in terms of portrayal. I'm thinking of Jesse specifically because I think in all interactions we had, in interviews, even in just meetings with anybody, Jesse is certainly a person that is beyond respectful to his elders, as is pretty common in most indigenous cultures. That's a shame that is not something that's common in American society. But I think when you are asking something of a person, especially in the context of some of these communities that have been visited before by documentary crews, that haven't always liked the documentaries that have come out of them, I experienced, I think, some of the strongest cultural connections I had when I was younger at these gatherings in upstate New York of either my Lebanese side or my Italian side with all my relatives everywhere. And so for me, it was a real joy, I think, to see with Jesse, to have Jesse lead us into this world that was very much multi-generational, that was about respecting your elders and where you came from, and also the land that you came from. So we definitely connected on that. We had our premiere at Tribeca, and then we toured it at a bunch of different film festivals around America, which was great. A lot of different audiences, and a lot of people seemed to understand. It was really heartening, because I think you take a film out, you're just like, I don't know, and he'll tell you, I'm a nervous wreck before everything, until it starts screening, and I'm like, it seems like folks are liking it, but all sorts of demographics. It's like there was a lot of older, well-to-do white folks maybe in Palm Springs that watched it. There were high school kids in Hot Springs, Arkansas that understood it. And then this summer we had a wonderful opportunity of taking it to most of the 7 reservations that are the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota reservations in the Dakotas and Minnesota.
All of the conversations we had after the film were really interesting. A lot of people are like super on board, but then there's also the other side of the spectrum of people that didn't totally it didn't totally align with them politically, but I think there were more interesting conversations had after that film because of the film, or it served as something to talk about. It was really lovely to selfishly not even to go back, but also to bring the film to the community as that it features and we're talking about, and show them this is the story that's being shared. And a lot of the people, and we got such a really good and amazing response. Elders can be, tricky to get on your side, or can be
Impress.
or impress, or they can be the harshest critics. And we dodged some bullets, and maybe they were being polite, but it was really rewarding to go back after 2 years after making it, after filming it, and bring it back to the community.
One of the things that Jesse mentions, and I think this is true for Italian Americans as it's true for everything Americans, people that are living on this land to know this history, and that is that no one is saying it's your fault, you're the bad guy, but it is impossible to ignore that your ancestors or someone else's ancestors set something in motion a long time ago that continues today, continues to oppress today. And when you know that and you do nothing about it, you are at fault. I mean, I hope that this film extends a hand to be like, come join us, rather than being like, shame on you, shame on you. But at a certain point, we have to, if we understand why we're standing here, why we're sitting here on this land, we have a responsibility, I think, to do what's right now that hopefully we're presented with more facts about it, Yeah.
When they illegally took the land from our people, it wasn't just the land itself that was taken. It was part of a process to colonize us. If you can make the people suffer by destroying their economic system and their languages and their culture, then you can try to conquer a people.
As an Indigenous person, as someone who comes from this land, I'm just trying to exist.
Our work here is not just about reclaiming land, but reclaiming power.
We are Lakota, Lakota, and Lakota.
We're the last of the fighters. We held on for so long, and we continue to hold on. We're not going anywhere.
We are fighting for the integrity of our people.
We are building the world that we want to live in.
All this land is Indigenous land.
More and more Indigenous folks in leadership positions, because people are recognizing that Indigenous people should be leading this. And I think beyond that, there are a lot of smaller breakouts for Indigenous folks from all over the place.
I've heard it described back to me as although the movie is specifically Lakota Nation versus the United States, it's a very, very similar story to most tribes that existed in the United States that still exist. And then also internationally, it's a very similar set of circumstances or things that led us to the place that we are now, whether that's Brazil or Colombia or, anywhere. For more information about the film, you could visit Lakota Nation bsus.movie. And for more information about just the movement in general, you could visit blackhillsjustice.org.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.